This is the season reward that is free on World of Tanks console right now, and today's video is going to cover everything you need to know about this tank, the HMH M51, which is of course the tier 8 premium medium tank. It is kind of like basically the same as the Revelarize that's already in the French line, or the French premium line. However, this one is an American version, kind of. It's basically an inspired version, but what you can see about this vehicle is, of course, the kind of main armament. That's kind of what people are attracted to the M51, and that is because it has 390 alpha damage, fairly decent penetration, fairly decent kind of accuracy, and overall, the main part about the tank is the main armament. Now, this replay is going to showcase what you can do with that main armament and how you can use this tank to earn not just silver, because it can earn a decent amount of silver, but it's also how you can use it to have really good games. And if you're interested in 3 marking the vehicle, then maybe this will give you an indication as to how you can kind of play the tank in a variety of different scenarios, even if you are in a top tier, well, a bottom tier game within World of Tanks console. And I think that that's what we've got in the next replay, so stay tuned for that. But this one is more of a carrying game where you're having to kind of think and adapt, and the M51 is a tank that I'm not going to say is all out amazing for being super adaptable, because ultimately it is really tall, which makes the gun depression kind of annoying in some regards, so you can't really 100% rely upon it. And of course you don't really have armour either, because this is, after all, a M4 Sherman hull basically, it's at tier 8, so you don't bounce anything, and the turret armour of this thing's not particularly great either, so you've got that to contend with as well as we bounce off the cupola of the Roger Dodger there. Luckily avoiding the artillery shell, because as we've just mentioned, the armour's terrible, so if you take an artillery shell you get taken out pretty quick, so it's not particularly great in that regard. And you can see here the typical Erlenberg, one side gets one side and then the other team get the other side. It's just one of those boring gameplays, or at least gameplay maps. But I'd like to see them introduce the PC version of the map, where there's a lot more potential to use the central areas of the map, but unfortunately we just don't have that at the moment. Now, one thing that you'll noted there is that because I was firing heat rounds, which were for the increased penetration, we didn't actually manage to hit the M48 Ram Panzer, whereas if we were using the standard rounds, which are APCR, which are really good, I highly recommend you firing pretty much standard in this thing, unless you feel like you have to pen something like an E100 or something like that, then you will be able to do that with those heat rounds. But ultimately, the speed advantage that you get from using the APCR rounds is probably worth it on its own, so we're going to see that within this game, and how you can use them yourself for not only just dealing more damage, but actually like using your kind of knowledge of round speeds to select which targets you should be firing at and stuff like that, because that's really important if you're interested in maintaining a variety of just long range engagements, short range engagements, people where you've got a light tank that's moving super quick. It's so much easier with APCR, whereas if you've got a slow lumbering heavy, you want the heat rounds because they get increased penetration and you've got more time to kind of think about where you need to be aiming. So that's kind of the very quick rundown, but this vehicle, you need to know about all of that if you want to make it work 100%. But the other thing that you have with this vehicle is, as you just saw, the armor model coming in bad. But the other thing is the gun depression is quite nice. So although we say this is a very tall vehicle, which makes sometimes when you're in certain ridgelines really annoying, but if you can find a nice kind of flat ridgeline, because you get decent gun depression, you can use it pretty well, and you can mainly avoid a lot of shells that will be coming in. Now we try and hit the Jackal and successfully do, which is nice, and of course we're getting a little bit of assistance damage, so it's another thing that you can kind of potentially count on, but it's not that, like, you don't consistently get spotting damage in this vehicle. It's not an all-out kind of spotting vehicle, but it definitely can provide you with some nice bonuses if you think about it. Now, one thing that you'll note me doing in a second is going, the the enemy team seem to be moving pretty aggressively. Maybe I should think about kind of getting into a position that's best going to suit my tank, especially with things like the Shashka moving forward, the SU-100, there's a Scorpion G over there, there's loads of different tanks coming in. We try and go for the kind of non-aim shot on the SU, but only manage to miss and derp it into the ground, which can be expected. But there we go. Obviously, I'm interested to see whether or not you think that this is just a very niche tank that's only really good in certain situations, because I understand like this tank is probably nowhere near good for everyone, and I don't particularly think that anyone that wants to be super competitive is going to really like this vehicle, because there are some key kind of weak points, and it's not very easy to get away with a lot of things. If you do something wrong, you know about it in the M51. So if you're a new player or someone that's maybe kind of just getting into the game, or maybe you've not had that much experience in medium tanks with no armor, then yeah, playing the M51 is probably not your best bet. But if you are interested in just being a bit more of an underdog, something that people always undervalue, then this tank is almost perfect. So you can see from this point of view, the game is kind of looking pretty mediocre. Like, we're not going to do a whole lot more, and so we've got to be very careful. We missed the shot on the Shashka, which was really, really annoying considering that vehicle could have got taken out in one shell, but because we missed, it's just a pain in the backside. Now, from this point, we've got two options really. We can either go aggressive towards the left hand side, or we can play a bit more passive and try and spot some people that are going to be on the flank behind us, because there could be someone there. Unfortunately, we don't fully aim against the J Panther because of myself just being an absolute bot. We luckily get missed by the enemy IS, which we place a nice round into him. And that's kind of things that, yeah, you do have to get a little bit lucky if you want some really, really fantastic games. But you can be very consistent as well. And you'll note that the reload is about 8 seconds, roughly, dependent on the perks, dependent on your crew, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, if you've got a fairly decent reload with a nice alpha damage, then you can consistently have good games, and that is what we're after in this result. So we try and hit the Rampanzer, successfully do that and get him out the game. At this point, 6-4. So it's looking like we need to kind of think about what we're doing. The IS actually lands a shot from behind us. He has the 390 alpha damage main armament, which is something we'll be aware of, because now we are a one shot for him. There's now 4 against 6, and we've got some tanks on our team that aren't particularly that competitive in the form of the tank destroyers, well, mainly because of their hit points that they've got remaining, but there's a few low hit point tanks on the enemy team, so maybe we'll be able to take advantage of that. With the Hellcat 105, which to all intents and purposes is a pretty broken tank at its tier, yeah, maybe we can get away with it, maybe we can do something in this game, but unfortunately for him, he does just YOLO in for some unbeknownst reason. But even in a broken tank, you can't just go off in on your own. But nonetheless, it's me on 284 hit points, a one shot for every single tank in the game left, and a Centurion on full hit points, which is actually really, really nice. So from this point, we can try and make it work. We can try and come out with the victory, which is ultimately what you want. And this is where the Super Sherman kind of comes in pretty nicely, and that's because you can get into these positions and you can just, you know, casually take away the remaining hit points of a lot of these vehicles that are still left alive. Now, we have a medium tank, a heavy tank, a tank destroyer, and an artillery piece, pretty much the quadruplet. We also, of course, are missing a light tank, but yeah, not particularly too fussed on that. But there we go, the J Panther now gets spotted and he's coming up from the depths. We go over, we try and hit him, but unfortunately we don't manage to do that. At this point, we do have to be very wary that there are artillery in this game, which means that we're going to be kind of a little bit under the cosh because we can't get spotted. So we've got to be kind of staying back. The M50... Oh, sorry, no, I think it's the GUI, actually. Something like that. It's a German artillery piece, GW Panther or something like that. But essentially what we've got to do is remain undetected, because we don't want to be getting hit. The things can basically miss us or sneeze next to us and we'll still be getting taken out because artillery in the game. But what we're doing here is just constantly lighting up the IS. I know that the Centurion is going to deal with the Jackal because I believe we saw him earlier and he was on very low hit points anyway, so I wasn't worried that the full health Centurion could take out a tier 6 autoloader that, yeah, is not particularly amazing anyway. So now it's just us versus the IS. And at this point, the IS kind of poking around this corner, place a nice round into him, and of course low roll. So yeah, he's left on 58 hit points. So at this point, what do we do? Do we go full on? He looks like he's not going to come back out because, understandably, I probably wouldn't poke out again either. So it's kind of one of those scenarios. Do I now be super aggressive? Do I go straight through the middle? Or do I take the sensible route that will probably guarantee me the win as opposed to potentially guarantee me the win? So we're going to go up on take the long way round so we can use the vision of the HMH like you've just seen there where we were out spotting the IS because it's blind as a bat, and we can use that to our advantage. You can see the IS does actually get spotted by the medium and taken out very, very quickly as a result. So from this point, it's just the enemy artillery piece left alive, and we have no problems in taking those out within this game. So we've loaded, as you know, the standard rounds in this vehicle don't really need the heat rounds all too much, and so we can go after this artillery piece. And I'm actually surprised that we actually spotted him there. I'm trying to get into a nice position to hit him. I'm not going to be able to shoot through the ridge, so we're not even going to bother. It is, of course, the Hummel, not the GW Panther, which is nice. So it's the tier 6, but probably equally as broken, if not more. And we managed to shut him down for an extra 300 damage, bringing our grand total damage up to 3,800, or thereabouts. And of course, picking up the victory for our team in a game where you could have quite easily thrown it away if it was the Scorpion and the SU-130 PM, but we also pick up 680 assistance and 4 enemies destroyed, picked up 100,000 silver with no operations or anything bonus-wise on that. Yeah, a really, really decent result and a pretty decent tank overall. So let's have a look at this second gameplay where we're bottom tier, because does this actually work in like probably 90% of your games when you are bottom tier? So the next map is Highway, and we're looking at seeing how this can perform in the bottom tier gameplay, as we've already mentioned. But what you can see in this replay is the different levels of kind of play that you have to use when playing these paper medium tanks. And that's because in a top tier game, you may bounce around. In a bottom tier game, you're not bouncing anything at all, ever, pretty much. Which means that if you get spotted, you're most likely going to take a hit, so you have to play a little bit more passively, and you have to make sure you know what you're doing so that you can consistently get damage. You can make sure that you aren't getting taken out super quickly so that you can then deal with whatever you want to do from that point onwards. And you can see here, just trying to hit the RU-251 at the beginning of the game, use the great accuracy of the M51 to come out on top, and yeah, we successfully do that. Now from this point you can see that the majority of the enemy team have taken up residence on their respective hill, as have our team, along with some actually going towards the town area, as you probably should if you're playing heavy tanks. But nonetheless, what we're doing at this point is just going after these tanks that are sat over on the kind of middle area, and we're hoping to then move down and deal some damage to those that are going to be sat up on the hill area, because if we can get into this position, if we can deal with the majority of tanks that are over here, then we can kind of move forward and do as we please basically from here. The 50 TP on the enemy team still sat up on that ridge line. It is in his heavy tank, and he's trying to get some shots on the side of our tanks, and unfortunately for me, haven't got enough penetration to go through the side of the top of the turret, which is a little bit disappointing, but I'm not surprised. So we load the heat round, and ultimately at this point, I'm not surprised that we're loading heat rounds, because it's probably the only round that's going to work against a lot of the vehicles other than things like the Brask or what have you. But you can see here, just playing very cautiously. I'm not going to be overly bravado about it, and we're going to be able to fire on the move, which is kind of lucky to hit the Death Star there. But nonetheless, we really do enjoy it when you hit on the move. And what I'm deciding here is just which way round do I want to go? Do I want to go left along this hill, or do I want to go on the right hand side? I decided that actually going on the left is probably the safer option of the two, because I don't know who's in the town area. We have no idea. We know where the FE215B183 is from this point. And yeah, we can kind of decide from there. The 50 TP, for some unbeknownst reason, decides he's going to just YOLO through the centre of the field against literally probably 70% of our team. Terrible idea. Don't know what was going through his head. Maybe nothing. But either way, what we're doing here is just poking this ridgeline. It's a position you can use in pretty much every single tank in the game that has gun depression, and you get into this sort of scenario. Sometimes it's not worth pushing up to the next hill until you can guarantee that there's enough support to kind of counter anyone that's going to be going up there. We place a nice round into the Draugr, firing heat. Definitely don't need heat for the Draugr, but probably just a case of I'm trying to focus on the game rather than my ammunition choice. You should always do both if you can, but you know, it's not really a problem. The Draugr here, we see moving up and cresting this ridgeline, he can be a little bit of a problem, because with his Hesh rounds he has enough penetration to go through us, which means he can do 480 damage per shell towards us, and the Draugr is really strong at this tier, so he's kind of our main competitor at this point, so we need to make sure that we are kind of capturing that in our thought process, along with, of course, the fact that we don't want to get YOLO'd by the FE215B, because that's going to be a pain in the front side. And you can see here that the FE, well, the Draugr drives in front of the FE, which would have been nice because we want to get rid of that FE, so we just don't have the chance of being a one-shot, because fun. But nonetheless, what we've got here, Draugr, Chieftain. Chieftain is my main real annoyance at this point, because I can't really do anything with him sat there. Yes, he has a cupola weak spot, but at this point, it's kind of one of those weak points that I'm not going to be able to really do much about. I try and go for the exposed hull armour, but I knew it was probably not going to pen. But nonetheless, we go for it anyway. The Draugr now is kind of coming over. We decide to actually go over and try and hit him, and of course bounce. So we load the APCR rounds again, because the heat rounds going into spaced armour is terrible. So we want to make sure we can just get rid of this Draugr. So we go over, take him out, and we get hit by the T62A, which isn't a problem. The Barask, with the happy player mentality, decides he's going to come out and just try and get one shot into me. Probably not the best idea. Should have probably gone for people behind him if he wanted to preserve the hit points that he did have, but nonetheless I don't really care about his hit points either way. And you can see now the Chieftain, he's kind of still sat there. Really annoying tank to actually come up against in the HMH, so we've got that to contend with. And of course there is this T62A. We've got an AMX-50B who's too scared to go down and try and actually deal with him, whilst we're kind of just deciding what to do. The 50B does actually finally clip him. Now it's just a case of trying to mop up the last remaining hit points, and because this vehicle is not particularly that slow, you can get into position to do that at the end of the game. There's a Barask here. He's obviously the one we want, kind of YOLO wagon that just decided to come out of nowhere. I do try and go for the ram, but I just go completely off out of the way. It's kind of disappointing, but we do shut down the T62A going through that frontal drive wheel, which is nice, and we managed to pick up kind of one of the last remaining hits of the game, of course, that being on the Maus by the Type 4 Heavy. So really did enjoy playing the M51. It was kind of a tank I knew would be pretty low down on my kind of thumbs up list, but it was good. It's definitely one that you can enjoy. I don't think it's painful to play. Equally, I don't think anyone's going to be smashing through the matchmaker with this thing. But yeah, let me know what you think of this free tank in the comment section down below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, as it really does help me out. And of course, if you want to see any specific content that might help you out, then of course, leave that in the comment section down below. And check out some of the other stuff we have on the channel on screen on the left and on the right now. So I hope you join me there, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.